The Deadly Type with Candice DeLong, True Crime, Episode 2. She smiled at him once at a coffee shop. Just once. 6 months later, he was standing in her bedroom while she slept, convinced they were destined to be together. But when she rejected him, that obsession turned into something far more dangerous. Today, former FBI profiler Candice DeLong reveals the chilling psychology behind narcissistic obsession and why it can turn deadly. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most terrifying aspects of human psychology, narcissistic obsession. And we're not doing this alone. We're joined by insights from Candice DeLong, one of the FBI's most renowned criminal profilers, who has spent decades inside the minds of some of the most dangerous obsessive criminals in American history. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we explore the darkest corners of true crime, psychology, and human behavior, always with expert insights and real cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people around you. Now, let's talk about something that makes narcissistic obsession so particularly dangerous. Unlike other forms of obsession, the narcissist doesn't just want you, they believe you deserve you. They've constructed an entire fantasy world where you belong to them, and when reality doesn't match that fantasy, that's when things turn deadly. Before we dive into the cases, we need to understand what makes a narcissist tick, and more importantly, what makes them obsess. Candice DeLong has explained in her years of profiling work that narcissistic personality disorder exists on a spectrum. Not every narcissist becomes a stalker or killer, but when narcissism combines with obsession, rejection sensitivity, and a complete lack of empathy, you get a cocktail of psychological traits that can lead to devastating outcomes. The narcissistic core wound. At the heart of every narcissist is what psychologists call a core wound, a deep, usually unconscious belief that they're fundamentally flawed or worthless. Everything the narcissist does is an attempt to compensate for this wound. They create a false self, a grandiose image of perfection, and they need constant validation from the outside world to maintain this illusion. This is where obsession comes in. When a narcissist fixates on someone, that person becomes what's called a narcissistic supply, essentially a source of validation, admiration, and identity. The target isn't seen as a full human being with their own thoughts, feelings, and autonomy. Instead, they're an object, a mirror that reflects back the grandiose image the narcissist needs to survive psychologically. Candice DeLong has noted in her cases that this objectification is key to understanding why narcissistic obsession can turn violent. When you don't see someone as fully human, it becomes easier to harm them, control them, or even kill them. The fantasy bond. One of the most disturbing aspects of narcissistic obsession is what mental health professionals call the fantasy bond. This is when the narcissist creates an entire relationship in their mind that may have little to no basis in reality. Maybe you smiled at them once. Maybe you had one conversation at a party. Maybe you're just a barista who makes their coffee every morning. To you, these are normal, polite interactions. To the narcissistic obsessor, these are signs of a deep, meaningful connection, even destiny. The fantasy bond is so powerful because it serves multiple purposes for the narcissist. It provides a constant source of narcissistic supply, even when the person isn't actually present. It allows them to feel special, chosen, part of a grand romantic narrative. It fills the emptiness at their core with something that feels like love, but is actually control. Candice DeLong has investigated cases where the perpetrator had entire journals, artwork, and elaborate plans built around someone they'd met only once or twice. In their minds, they were already in a relationship. The victim just didn't know it yet. Why rejection triggers violence. Here's where things get dangerous. When the reality inevitably crashes into the fantasy, when the target of obsession rejects the narcissist, gets a restraining order, or simply makes it clear they're not interested, the narcissist experiences what's called a narcissistic injury. This isn't just hurt feelings. For the narcissist, rejection is an existential threat. It shatters the grandiose false self they've constructed. It confronts them with the core wound they've spent their entire life trying to avoid. And because they lack the emotional regulation skills that healthy people develop, they can't process this pain in normal ways. Instead, the narcissistic injury triggers what's called narcissistic rage, an intense, often violent response that serves to Instead, the narcissistic injury triggers what's called narcissistic rage, an intense, often violent response that serves to He started showing up more frequently. The gifts became more elaborate and expensive. Jewelry, designer handbags, things Sarah had never asked for and didn't want. She tried to return them. He'd leave them at the nurse's station anyway. Escalation. Sarah's colleagues started noticing. Marcus was there almost every night now. He knew her schedule better than she did. One of the other nurses found him looking through Sarah's car one night. Sarah got a restraining order. This should have been the end of the story. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. For Marcus, the restraining order was the ultimate narcissistic injury. Not only had Sarah rejected him, but she'd publicly humiliated him, involved the legal system, told the world that he was the problem. His grandiose self-image couldn't withstand this assault. In his mind, Sarah had transformed from the perfect woman to the ultimate betrayer. The idealization flipped to devaluation. But the obsession remained. The murder. 3 months after the restraining order was issued, Marcus waited in the hospital parking lot with a gun. He'd been planning it for weeks, maybe longer. He'd convinced himself that if he couldn't have Sarah, no one could, that she deserved to be punished for what she'd done to him, that this was somehow justice. When Sarah walked out after her shift that night, Marcus approached her. Security camera footage showed her backing away, holding up her hands, clearly afraid. Witnesses heard her say, "Please, just leave me alone." Marcus shot her 6 times. He then turned the gun on himself, but he survived. Sarah did not. The investigation. When Candice DeLong and her team investigated this case, they found Marcus's apartment filled with evidence of his obsession. Journals detailing every interaction he'd ever had with Sarah, analyzed and reanalyzed for hidden meanings. Photographs he'd taken of her without her knowledge, plans for their future together, wedding ideas, baby names, houses he'd looked at for them to live in. There were also the later journals, after the rejection. Pages and pages of rage. Sarah was every horrible name you can imagine. She was evil, manipulative, a tease. She led him on. She deserved what was coming. This is the trajectory of narcissistic obsession in its most dangerous form. Fantasy bond formation, misinterpretation of normal kindness as special connection, rejection, narcissistic injury, oscillation between idealization and devaluation, rage and planning, violence. What could have prevented this? In hindsight, there were so many warning signs. Marcus's inability to accept Sarah's initial polite refusal, his escalating presence, his boundary violations, the expensive, inappropriate gifts. But Sarah, like so many victims, tried to be nice. She tried not to make waves. She thought getting a restraining order would solve the problem. Candice DeLong emphasizes in her training that restraining orders, while sometimes necessary, can actually escalate danger with narcissistic obsessors because they represent such a profound narcissistic injury. What might have helped? Earlier intervention by hospital security, clear, direct communication from the start, though even this might not have prevented violence, better training for healthcare workers on recognizing dangerous obsession, threat assessment protocols that could have flagged Marcus's escalating behavior, more robust protection measures once the restraining order was in place. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with Marcus. He chose violence. He chose to see Sarah as an object that belonged to him, rather than as a human being with her own will and autonomy. The psychology of possession. One of the things that makes narcissistic obsession so dangerous is the psychology of possession. The narcissist doesn't want a relationship in the way you and I understand relationships. They want ownership. Candice DeLong has explained this concept in her lectures and writings, and it's crucial to understanding these cases. You are an extension of them. In the narcissist's mind, their obsession target isn't a separate person. You're part of them, part of their identity, a reflection of their grandiose self-image. Think about how you feel about your arm. Your arm is part of you. You don't negotiate with your arm. You don't accept your arm's decision to leave you. Your arm doesn't get to have relationships with other people. This is how a narcissistic obsessor sees you. You're not autonomous. You're part of them. And when you assert your separateness, when you demonstrate that you have your own thoughts, feelings, and choices, it's as shocking and unacceptable to them as your arm deciding to detach and walk away. The narcissistic supply chain. Here's another way to understand it. Narcissists need supply the way the rest of us need food and water. Supply is attention, admiration, validation, anything that feeds their grandiose self-image and protects them from the core wound of shame. When a narcissist becomes obsessed with someone, that person becomes their primary supply source. They've invested all their eggs in one basket. Their entire emotional regulation system depends on getting supply from you. When you withdraw that supply by rejecting them, leaving them, or even just not being available enough, they go into what's essentially a withdrawal state. And like any addict in withdrawal, they can become desperate, irrational, and dangerous. The if I can't have you mentality. This is where many narcissistic obsession cases end, in murder-suicide or attempted murder. The logic goes something like this. You are mine. You are part of my identity. Without you, I am nothing. If I can't have you, then you don't get to exist independently. If I can't have you, no one can. And if I have to destroy you to maintain my sense of control, so be it. Candice DeLong has explained numerous cases where the perpetrator explicitly stated some version of this logic. They genuinely believed that killing their obsession target was preferable to accepting that the person was separate from them. This is also why murder-suicide is so common in these cases. Once they've destroyed the person who represented their identity and supplied their emotional needs, there's nothing left. The core wound is fully exposed. The shame is unbearable. Death becomes preferable. The role of rejection sensitivity. Let's talk about a specific psychological trait that makes narcissistic obsession particularly volatile: rejection sensitivity. Everyone feels some pain when rejected. It's a normal human response. But for people with high rejection sensitivity, especially combined with narcissism, perceived rejection triggers an intense emotional cascade that can lead to violence. How rejection sensitivity works.